in association with Aon. My name is Niall Kitson. I am editor of TechCentral.ie and your moderator for this webinar, where we ask the burning question: how can IT help build resilience in the new world of work? To explore this topic, we will be joined by Rajeev Khanna, CIO at Aon, and Traci Peterson, Accenture Global Benefits Associate Director. At registration, you had the chance to submit a question for the Q&A portion of the presentation later on. We are also taking suggestions through the chat function, which will be moderated by our producer, Sean. So how can IT help build resilience in the new world of work? Workplaces that place a premium on security, motivation, and belonging get more out of employees than those that don't. According to a survey from Aon, the benefits of such resilient workforces are clear. 93% of resilient employees say they want to stay with their employer, and 86% feel fully motivated to work. These are incredibly positive points when we look at our situation of the great resignation that's around us at the moment. However, the same survey found that only 30% of employees consider themselves resilient. 42% do not feel secure at work, and 55% do not feel able to reach their potential. This is where IT departments can prove their worth by helping foster employee confidence through providing the right equipment, the right expertise, and being available to take feedback. So before we get started today, we're going to work the first of 3 polls for this afternoon. And we've got a very simple question for you all. What is your current working model? Are you office-based? Are you a remote work only? Or are you a mix of both? So Sean has just deployed the quiz, and we'll take a few seconds to get your votes in. Okay, I think that should do us on that poll. Sean, can you show us what the results are? A mix of both, 77%, and that's pretty much what we would imagine. And we'll sort of return to that point later on during the Q&A. I'd now like to welcome our first guest. Rajeev Khanna is Chief Information Officer at Aon. Rajeev has more than 25 years of experience in engineering, architecture, and operations. Previously, he was Vice President of Global Infrastructure Services at Expenditure, where he led the implementation of innovative solutions based on emerging technologies. Infrastructure Production Services at Azurion, an electronic device protection insurance company. He also spent 14 years with UBS AG and held technical and business leadership positions with Pencom Systems, Bankers Trust, and Ingersoll Rand. Rajeev, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess let's jump into it. As a wise man once said, we've had a really unusual few years, and hence it has thrown up an awful lot of unusual problems for IT departments to have to work with. So question 1 on our list, what threats to workforce resilience were you able to identify throughout the pandemic? Because as a large organization, it's understandable that you have a certain kind of infrastructure in place for employees, but the pandemic kind of threw that up and forced a reevaluation of your IT operation.
Yeah, look, so first of all, thanks for having me here. As the pandemic came about, there's clearly a very quick shift of new ways of working for all of us. It wasn't limited to a small group of folks. It wasn't limited to just Aon. It's a global phenomenon that happened that nobody was really fully prepared for. To that extent, we have always had a desire and a need to create a flexible model for people to work. You can work from anywhere. We wanted to provide the right tooling for our colleagues to be able to work from their home, from their office, or if they're on the road and traveling and such. So we didn't start off with our technology infrastructure to be pandemic ready, right? That wasn't the desire. The desire was always to provide the right tooling and being able to do that. And obviously, as we went to 95% of the population almost over a weekend, coming on a Friday, being in the office, and the following Monday being remote, we had to do quite a little bit of work. But the good news is that the strategy that we had set forward with the right tooling from collaboration, having laptops rather than desktops for people, and having a core set of implementation with the desire to enable our colleagues to do the best work from the right location with the right tools in their hands so they can support our clients. And that strategy actually played out really well for us. We were able to shift 95% of the folks almost overnight to go remote. We had been moving more and more to cloud-based services that enabled us to be able to scale appropriately when we needed to. For example, using VPN that is based in the cloud. So going from having maybe 20% of the population working from home on a regular basis to 95% of the population working from home was relatively easy. We had deployed global collaboration tools across the organization. That played out really well when we wanted to get on meetings and be able to support our colleagues and clients in the same way. So all of those things, the technology was a key enabler in that aspect. But at the same time, there's clearly a shift in work styles, because talking to somebody in a conference room versus everybody working from home, there's a shift. And to that extent, during that time, it wasn't just a change in work style, it's the pressure for perhaps health concerns for yourself or a family member, having to take care of the kids because they're no longer going to school, and having that flexibility to be able to do this and find the right balance between what we needed to do from a work perspective, but also be able to support the personal life. And I think that our strategy, once again, not really set up for not planning for a pandemic, but it played out reasonably well when we got into that situation. And we obviously had some work to do to scale some of our infrastructure, but overall strategy and moving to the tooling didn't necessarily change. And the last one I would say is that one of the things that we had to do and we continue to do is how do we support our colleagues with the new capabilities that we are introducing in terms of training, organizational change management. How do we teach them how to use the right tools? Because sometimes technology can be overwhelming. Rather than being helpful, it could be a burden if we don't do it right and just keep putting more and more things out there without the support that is necessary to go along with it.
That's an interesting point on support there, because when you have that sudden change overnight, you've got to manage sort of an employee awareness element of things along with a training element of things as well. So how did you manage those 2 points in together? Because it's not like you can get everyone into a room and say, okay, from henceforth, this is how things are going to be done.
Yeah, like, I mean, so I would say our training was not where we wanted to be. Even we recognized we were not the strongest in terms of our colleague training, introducing new capabilities to the organization, helping our colleagues adopt. So we partnered with our people organization and our learning and development organization to actually help create programs that allowed for people to learn things at their pace, at their convenience. So for example, video-based training, or our Yammer-based training, or sort of the in-person in the sense as the virtual in-person classroom type training. So we leverage multiple different channels for us to introduce new capabilities to our colleagues. But that happened with partnership with the people organization, because as a technology organization, we can talk about bits and bytes, but we're not necessarily always thinking about all of the different sort of human elements of how people learn, how are the different styles of learning. And that's where the people organization played a critical role with us. And to that extent, in the last two plus years, we've come a long way and actually learned a lot in terms of how we can do this better. And our organization change management capabilities today are significantly better than they were before we started, before the pandemic. And we continue to build upon that. And the other thing that I would say is that during the pandemic, I would say there's more of an acceptance from our colleagues as well, because thanks to them, we were able to deploy a lot more during that time, because there's that openness and a need that drove the adoption more so than we would have done perhaps if we were pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I think the stat that's thrown around is that companies had to do, what was it, 18 months worth of digital transformation in 3 to 6. That it was an incredibly tough learning curve for everybody. And part of that problem, and something that we're still dealing with at the moment, when it comes to getting the right equipment into the right hands, we're now dealing with a supply chain crisis as well, something that evolved out of the pandemic. So how have you been dealing with that particular issue as well?
Yeah, so look, I mean, as I said, in the early part of the pandemic, fortunate for us, we had moved to a laptop-based sort of deployment number of years prior to the pandemic. So when we went into the pandemic, 95% of our population already had a laptop. So when it came time to it, we just told everybody, take your laptop home, right? And that became the primary way of working. But there's clearly need for incremental equipment that was necessary. For example, additional monitors. I need a keyboard, I need a mouse, all of that kind of stuff. So we had two channels that we deployed. One is, unfortunately, we went into some of the offices and we took equipment out because nobody was using it. And we shipped that equipment to the colleagues that needed it. Secondly, we worked with our partners to be able to secure some of the equipment. We pre-provisioned some of the equipment that are commonly used even before we knew what the demand was going to be. So we went out and bought several hundred monitors. We went out and bought a few additional laptops, et cetera, that we could use and deploy as the need came. But as we are now in the more of the sort of the normal scheme of things, and the supply chain issues have continues to be a challenge, we have to get better at our forecasting. And maybe the different way of saying is we have to get better at guessing as to what the demand is going to be, and continue to pre-order some of the equipment before it's needed. And that's how we are trying to manage this. We obviously have large relationships with our suppliers. We work with them to get a better understanding of what they are doing to be able to support us. And based on, as we get a better understanding of their bottlenecks, we can adjust our forecast accordingly. And that's how we are managing it at the moment. And I think will continue for some period of time until some of the supply chain issues downstream get addressed.
Yeah, and supply chain, extending to component availability as well as laptop availability. So it's sort of a very it's only something that's going to get more challenging, unfortunately. So let's have a look at the role of feedback then, because in your discussion so far, you've talked about what you've been bringing to staff. So how did you manage to create a virtuous circle to find out what aspects of this strategy was working and what wasn't for a non-technical workforce?
Yeah, look, I think that feedback is critical. It comes in for various different channels. There are some formal channels and there are some informal channels that we use to do that. The formal channels would be things like our regular pulse surveys across our colleague population on a more frequent basis than we would have normally done, especially focused on well-being, especially focused on work styles, remote working, etc. Right? So that's clearly one channel. We've introduced our smart working model. So once again, as the survey talked about, fully in office, fully remote, and hybrid. And within those models, we have the ability to gather the data as to what people are desiring as to what they want to do. And I would say the survey results are generally in line with our expectation and what we've seen as well, right? And in addition to that, we have a chief well-being officer across the organization, and that person is putting programs and initiatives together that support our colleagues in an effective way. In addition to that, we have informal channels, right? So we more frequent manager check-ins that happen, especially when we went remote. more one-on-one conversations or a group conversation. In a certain way, you can say the participation in some of the social activities is better because when you do a happy hour or a gathering or in a local geography, you can only have people who are local to you participate. But when we all went virtual and you're doing a trivia night, you can have a global participation because everybody's virtual. And in a way that actually created a better connectivity in those settings than we can generally do if everybody's local, right? So I think it's a mixture of formal and informal channels through colleague surveys, our engagement service that we do conduct, as well as more frequent check-ins with our colleagues through our managers, and frankly, enabling and providing the tools for our managers to be mindful of what they are doing, right? And that's where, once again, people organization plays a critical role to give the tools and some guidance on how best to go you support your colleagues, and having a chief well-being officer who is actually putting programs that we can all support to conduct in a somewhat of a consistent fashion across the organization. So feedback is critical, and that in our pulse surveys we specifically have asked questions around technology. Do you have the right tools? What else would you want to see happen, etc. So that is actually continuously defining and help us figure out what are the requirements for the future as we think about new capabilities that we want to introduce for our colleagues.
So lastly, for the moment, what kind of learnings have IT departments in particular taken from this experience? How have IT departments changed the way they work?
Look, I think it's a change for everybody, which is true. So one of the things that I mentioned before is, as a technologist, we don't always think about the colleague experience as the sort of the first thing. So our organization change management muscle is better now than it's ever been. We become more mindful, we are more thoughtful, we're spending more time and investment in terms of organization change management, in terms of training, how we think about those things. Secondly, as you said, the digital journey for the colleagues, that has changed. We have accelerated a lot of the initiatives and programs to deliver faster and being able to become more of a digital organization. Things like automation, things that allow for people to do their job in a better, effective way, that allows them to focus on higher value, client-facing activities more so than what we've done. In continuously introduction of better collaboration tools. We all use various different conferencing technologies, but they lack a certain things. For example, whiteboarding is a challenge. How do you do whiteboarding when you are in a mixed mode? Some people are in the office, some people are not in the office. There are tools out there, but that we have to figure out how do we scale those tools. I would say a simple thing like a telephone. People have a telephone number, they are tied to their telephone number, their clients know that telephone number. Just deploying soft phones globally to every client, now you can take your desk phone with you wherever you are, right? That's a simple thing, but deploying that. And the last one I would say is that as we go more and more into a hybrid working models, deploying more capabilities in-room technology than perhaps in the past, right? But when you are in the office, you want to have the same experience as you did when you were at home, and we want to make sure that we are being inclusive for people who are in the office versus who may be dialing in from a remote location or from home. How do you make sure that you are creating an experience that allows for people to collaborate effectively, right? So those are the things that have become top of mind, and once again, the key is a faster digitization of the business is going to require a better training, better adoption, as well as allowing for colleagues to see value in that adoption, so they can spend more time with the client to support the client versus worrying about the technology.
Rajeev, thank you so much for your time there. And Rajeev will be back with us for the Q&A after our customer interview, which brings us to the second poll for the afternoon. So Sean, if you're ready, our question that we want to ask you is, were you happy with the speed of your organization's move to a remote or hybrid working model? Yes or no? We'll take a few seconds for you just to put in your votes. And an overwhelming yes, 96%. So I guess there's nothing to argue about there. In the main, people have been very happy with their experience. So this is good news for employees and bad news for the panel. So we will have to move on. We are now joined by Accenture Global Benefits Associate Director Traci Peterson. Traci has a background in benefits and retirement before she joined Accenture in 2004 in their global human resources function. Having progressed through the organization, she now oversees a global benefits strategy deployed in 60 countries for more than 710,000 employees. Traci Peterson, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess we'll not dwell too much on whether people have been happy or unhappy. And I hope perhaps during our conversation, indeed, that will reflect your experience as well. So if you tell us in Accenture, the kind of threats to resilience you encountered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So, you know, I come at it from a little bit different lens, right? As an HR practitioner in a procurement of buying benefits, let's say administration tools for our organization, I really had to reflect back on how tech actually enabled us to kind of block the threat and improve resiliency of our people. Accenture did in 2020, they did a article around how and what the 6 building blocks were on building that resilient technology. And I think 3 of those directly relate to HR around the elastic digital worker, hyper automation, as well as service continuity. And as we flip that into, you know, in the human resources or HR benefit type of arena, really for us, I kind of had 4 value drivers out of that. One was really digitizing that employee experience. And what that did is putting the tech in front so that regardless of when and where they're living or working, and when the pandemic hit, it was easy for our people to access content, regardless if they had a critical need or if they had a simple inquiry. It also really had to be very employee focused and very employee centric in that overall offering. And what we did there is offering apps and as well as websites so people could take it regardless of where they lived or worked. And then we as an organization could deliver critical content. And as Rajeev talked about, like during the pandemic, we were able to do that, right? Deliver content in a centralized way, actually using some of the Aon technology that we have. And I'll give a specific example in a little bit. The other big piece for us, it helped us pivot to the future of work and that flexibility, because we already have the tech in place, right? But it helped build that transparency and trust for our people and deliver that content anytime, anywhere. And it was a reliable source for our employees. And then I think the final thing there is it really helped modernize HR. Because what it did is it freed up those low value tasks for our HR teams on the ground in our particular countries, having them work on those high valued proposition versus kind of answering employee inquiries over and over. It helped free them up to kind of build that capacity and build their ultimate resiliency as well. And specifically to India during the crisis, as an example, we had the Aon technology for benefits admin in place prior to the pandemic, which, you know, that was awesome to have that live and ready, because when the pandemic hit, what we were able to do in that regard is really centralize the content. So as the health systems there were overwhelmed, we could get information on telehealth or well-being packs that we were delivering to our people, as well as companies started to think about work at home, more enablement, not just the technology, but maybe tools and equipment beyond just the computers and laptops. We were able to then centralize that content to give them that information. Also delivering COVID hotline content to them too, if they were struggling in a particular area. So it really helped kind of localize the content, particular to an individual country. And that was just the India example. The other big piece is it helped us create that operational efficiency that I spoke about in improving that overall HR experience on the ground, so they could really kind of be people first versus kind of working through some of the challenges on answering employee inquiries. So as Rajeev talked about, right, tech was truly an enabler. Health was one of our #1 concerns through this, and still is our #1 concern as well. And really not to have tech be the burden, but try to reduce that burden on our people on a trusted resource to go to.
So you had, when it comes to developing feedback to sort of decide whether the tech strategy was working or not, you kind of had to take a two-pronged approach, really. So you had sort of what your staff was telling you, but you also had sort of the specification element as well, and sort of acting as the go-between with the IT department as well. So how did you marry up those two elements?
Yeah, and again, as Rajeev talked about, feedback is critical for any organization. And what we did at the start of the pandemic is we surveyed our entire global population, asking about what their thoughts were, getting their input, concerns about the future of their work. And as we reflected on that, we really kind of envisioned what that future would look like around well-being, productivity, fulfillment of our people. We also did a crowdsourcing event, so we used technology in that regard too, to kind of bring together global teams and creating solutions across 3 dimensions around our future experience that they were expecting, building careers that they love, and then recognizing that shared success and really kind of creating that sense of belonging for our individuals. And then we took those inputs, and what we did is we created the Future of Work strategy, which is kind of that inclusive, connected experience built on equality and diverse opportunities for our people. Someplace that they really can feel like they belong, that they thrive with those careers that they love. And you hear our CEO talk a lot about it with the omni-connected experience. And key of that is leveraging technology to support that teaming and that team connection and enabling that inclusive, consistent experience, so that people can feel like they're seen and heard no matter where they live or work. And then as we focus kind of on that feedback loop as well, we really kind of reimagine the communication strategies and those digital content as we move forward. We too have a chief well-being officer that's really kind of focused on the future of listening and gleaning what our employees are looking for. And one of the pieces that's critical in what we're trying to deliver is that one-stop shop and an intuitive platform so that employees can self-serve. And that technology kind of really enables that, either the Aon technology, we also use Workday, right, as that single source of the truth, and kind of delivering that across our countries regardless, so that they have that common experience.
Just, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into the idea of the elastic digital worker there. What is the vision of the elastic digital worker? Is this somebody that is naturally tech savvy, or is this somebody that you know can be trained from any level within the company?
Yeah, so I think there, from the elastical digital worker, you know, it's really kind of creating that culture that allows that space for an individual to kind of feel like they have the ability to use technology regardless of where they live and work. And again, for me as like an HR practitioner and that kind of that specialty on employee benefits, I can support that elastic digital worker around the offerings that we have, around their well-being, around their employee benefits, that they feel safe and secure as well, regardless of if they're client facing, if they're more operational focused, or if they're HR professionals like myself.
So looking towards the future of Accenture's strategy, which looks like it's going to be a hybrid world, to what extent is this being informed along the way? I imagine that, you know, as outputs increase, as feedback from staff becomes much more of a two-way street, the strategy will evolve on the basis of that kind of feedback and conversation. Would that be right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of a constant, you know, feedback loop as well. And like Aon, right, we get it through pulse surveys or engagement surveys, as well as, you know, various polls that we may run as an organization, and then of course anecdotal as well. But we use those to inform the decisions about how we will work in our hybrid in the future. And one of those pieces that it's really kind of simple actions, right? Using the right technology, making sure that teams feel connected and have that consistent experience. I think it's, co-creating that connected experience for our people that really helps in that virtual environment and prioritizing those social connections, which I think are truly important, and that in-person collaboration and then feeling included. I think that will help employees feel more resilient and that they belong and that they're treated, equally, regardless of where they live or work for Accenture. I think the power of that inclusive environment really focuses on creating and unleashing that innovation and creativity of our people. And it encourages them to bring kind of their authentic self to work. And how I'm kind of doing that in an employee benefits space is really trying to build resilient technology around mental health and kind of bringing that together. So we can kind of use chatbots as a way, or a front door in that experience to kind of bring that together so employees can come in and say, I'm really not feeling the best today, or I'm really struggling with my teenage son or my teenage daughter. I have an elderly parent, and trying to kind of help them as well, because those are distractors for them, right? As we all are humans in that regard. And so using kind of that tech in the future as well to kind of bring it together will really help in that hybrid, because we aren't all sometimes working together. So I can just ask my peer or my colleague, like, hey, where did you get that information from? So using tech to really drive that as an enabler.
So it sounds like maybe there was a challenge there in getting HR and tech to start talking the same language, because in HR you need a very humanistic approach to technology, whereas on the tech end of things they see things in very technical solutions. Did you find that there had to be that sort of common ground that had to be found, or was it a case of having fairly seamless conversations?
Yeah, I really do think, we're a tech company at heart, right? And so I think, as that I work with folks like Rajeev and folks in our organization around technology, they can see the vision, right? They understand the vision, and they help me secure kind of what is that path of least resistance, where maybe I don't have that detailed technical expertise, but we partner really well together on bringing that and putting the employee in the center and then designing tech around it.
Traci, thank you so much for your time. And we now move on to our third poll for the afternoon. And very simply, would you consider moving to a company with a more detailed wellness policy? So we'll take a few seconds for you to log your answers. And then once that's done, I would like to welcome Rajeev and Traci back for the Q&A portion of the session. Okay, Sean, you might like to give us the results. An almost even split, 54-46, which I guess makes it a pretty easy place for us to start our conversation. I suppose, Rajeev, we'll go back to you to start with. Have you been surprised by that result, an almost even split on the wellness front?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I would have expected a bit more towards people leaning towards the organization that actually focus on well-being. They have a clear policy, clear strategy, and such. But look, I mean, I think it's a unique environment, and to that extent, perhaps that is the quality of work and how you work is an individualistic thing. And yes, if a corporation having a well-being plan is a nice to have, and as I'm a little surprised by the split, I would have expected it to be heavier leaning towards favoring an organization that actually has a well-defined plan versus the one that would not.
Yeah, Traci, speaking to that same poll there, do you think it might be a case of HR actually maybe being a little bit ahead of the curve on this?
That it surprised me as well, because I think, what we all learned during the pandemic is taking care of ourselves. That's really one of the great benefits, I think, out of the pandemic, is the importance of your physical and emotional health. And so that did surprise me in that regard. But I do think, wellness is here to stay. I do think that as an organization, as companies continue to thrive, people at the center and the culture of well-being across multi-dimensions. Like our chief well-being officer really focuses on that physical, mental, emotional, financial health, and purposeful, as well as relational connections. And I think that is definitely here to stay. So the poll definitely surprised me a bit, that, I guess it's near and dear to my heart. Doesn't mean it's near and dear to everyone, right, in that space. But I really do think, if you focus on well-being, you're going to be well at work and you're going to be net better off as an individual.
Maybe it's a case of, because people have been remote working for so long as well, that maybe they feel they have a bit more control in general at the moment. But it is indeed a very fascinating result, and maybe we'll come back to from our first survey. It stood out to me that 12% of respondents said they were still office-based. Can you see, do you think this might be a function of sort of the great return to work, where some managers are, happier being able to stand over their employees? Or, is there an appetite to go back to the office full-time? I'll start with you, Traci, on that one.
Yeah, it's interesting because Accenture did a study around the future of work that was from April of 2021. And in that, what was interesting is 40% of the workers felt that they could be healthy and effective regardless of if they're on site or remote. So there's like this small segment of workers that felt they couldn't be efficient anywhere. However, the most productive individuals were also experiencing that burnout, fatigue, and frustration. And compared to that non-productive group. So what that says is that those individuals as an organization need to have well-being as the focus, and productivity was super important in that discussion as well. But we all know, right, everybody has those personal challenges, whether it's professionally or personally. And so an organization needs to continue to focus on that and get the right resources for people, either on site or remotely. And so regardless, again, of where you live or work, if you're working at the office or you're working at home or a hybrid of both, that autonomy is super important, I think, to people in that space. And then again, those health policies as well as mental health and reimagining those experiences, I think, are definitely key. And what we're doing here at our organization is really kind of focusing on like the nutritional element of you, if your body's healthy, right, your mind is healthy, and you'll be able to be more productive at work. And in that resiliency training, as well as, some parenting focus too, because caregivers, I think Rajeev even mentioned caregivers earlier on, that is a key component, because that is a significant burden on individuals when there's challenges at home. How do we help our employees with being more productive in that space as well? And how do we reimagine what the future is going to look like?
Rajeev, a question from the audience that I think you'd be the person to ask. Although it's aimed at both panelists. How do both panelists' organizations achieve a balance between flexibility and well-being and IT security? And can you share any insights into how your IT teams have coped differently in the overall challenges of the last 2 years, say the European versus the American experience? So I guess to jump into part one of that question, Rajeev, the relationship between resilience and security.
Yeah, look, I think the security is an element that we all have to deal with, right? That's just the reality of where we are. Unfortunately, the threats and the different channels are expanding. And I don't believe that's necessarily related to remote working or working in the office. It's just generally the threat space is just expanding, right? That's just the nature of where we are. And to that extent, security and protecting our client data, protecting our colleague, et cetera, is always top of mind. It's always one of those things that as we think about every solution, security has to be built in and part of the consideration. And unfortunately, in some cases, we have to compromise, right? Because we will compromise perhaps a little bit of suboptimal colleague experience for better security, right? Those are sort of the balances and the trade-offs that we do have to make, because security, both from a regulatory point of view or just protecting our clients' data, et cetera, is it's top of mind, and it's the number one thing that we all consider. And we have to make those adjustments as we need to. But at the same time, we are trying to find the right balance, right? Hey, how do I secure a colleague working remotely versus at the same time being able to give them the flexibility to do what they need to do. So the ongoing investment in various different tooling, different designs, different implementation to be able to find that balance. But it is a bit of a moving target, right? Because what we think about today is most likely is going to change in the future, and we always have to sort of stay a step ahead of what's coming. But as I said, it is a bit of a balance in terms of experience, in terms of protection, but protection is always going to win out a little bit more. Not a little bit; it's going to win out above some of the other compromises that we may have to make.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take that portion of the question and throw it your way, Tracy's as well, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, it's a good one, because I think, I work with a team, right, that focuses on our security. And that was one of the reasons as well. We kind of looked at, we had 5 reasons why we needed to outsource benefits administration in our countries, because we had disparate systems, right? Because each country was kind of doing their administration of their overall offerings. And what that did is we centralized that, then we can kind of understand the flow of data back and forth. And when GDPR and then the new release, right, of GDPR, we were able to then understand that data flow in a more centralized fashion, have a single HRIS file feed. So those are the things that really kind of help secure, I think, our overall technology. And I think from the well-being space, what we also tried to do, and hopefully that was clear throughout, but we try to put in more global programming too, because that way they have that integrated experience, and we're kind of working with one vendor or multiple vendors, but more on a global scale. And what that assisted us to do is kind of focus on that security of those tools in a more kind of centralized fashion. But yet, as people work across the globe, and maybe I'm working with my team in India or Argentina or the US, we all kind of had the same access. So the employee experience was still similar, again, regardless of where you work in the world.
Just to look at the second part of that question then, which was cultural differences between working with different teams. Now, in the question, they said Europe versus USA, but Traci, you mentioned India in your example as well. Did you find any cross-cultural differences?
Yeah, I think, there's always going to be cross-cultural differences. And mental health is actually a great example of one, where in certain cultures, like, we don't talk about, mental health and how that relates and how you show up at work. And so as we focus on like being truly human, I think in other, let's say, national health systems, the wait lines are very long, right? As well as maybe there's not enough mental health providers. So as we think about well-being programs and that cross-cultural differences, that was a big reason why we kind of have moved to more centralized tools, so people had more immediate access to providers, to support, to well-being programs, because each country is very unique, right? And we're trying to reduce the stigma for our individuals, but yet at the heart of it, need to make sure languages, right, were available and in local languages. So again, in that spirit of, people have easy access and it's culturally relevant to them as well.
Rajeev, same point there. Was there any problems dealing across territory, maybe harmonizing management structures, or was it fairly seamless and consistent?
Yeah, I would say it's fairly seamless from a purely from a technology perspective. But as Traci mentioned, right, I mean, there are always cultural differences, and part of being a multinational, both of our organizations are large multinational organizations, having the right sort of the tooling and sort of the awareness and the empathy to understand the differences is important, right? I mean, especially, I would just stick with the India example. India went through a different cycle than perhaps US as to when they felt the impact. There was a period of time where India was, everybody we work with either they were impacted or a family member was impacted, and having that understanding to say, hey, we are going to perhaps give you a bit more flexibility during that time, or hey, we're going to understand, hey, deal with what you need to deal with. And the benefit of being a global organization, from a work perspective, you can actually distribute the work in other parts of the world because we have a presence, we have the people who can actually cover that. And so from that point of view, I would say that culturally, not too much of a difference, but everybody went through a slightly different time cycle during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that time cycle point is absolutely essential, along with, I suppose, the political climate as well, where some countries just weren't taking the pandemic as seriously as others. I can't remember which country banned the use of the word pandemic, or banned the use of the word coronavirus as a tactic to make sure people weren't worried about it, but I'm sure it will come back to me. Traci, a question aimed at you, well, not you by name, but certainly by area. Do you think wellness programs are easier or harder for transnational companies than smaller ones?
Interesting. You know, I think that's an interesting question. I don't have a strong point of view either way. I think really what the key is that you have one, right? And that you continue to model and receive the feedback from your employees in order to transform that strategy. As you think about like a larger organization, you kind of have a global policy, right? You have some global offerings, but yet you need to localize that to the cultural relevancy of it too. In smaller companies as well, and haven't worked for a smaller one for a while, but as you kind of think about that the smaller organizations, they can do the same exact offering and solution and kind of have the local and the global solutions in place to have kind of that common framework and that common strategy and put that employee in the center.
Okay, to both of you, you both mentioned that your companies have employed a chief wellness officer. What kind of fights were had at boardroom level to make that happen, to make the representation that, look, this is actually a separate field in and of itself, and you need to start worrying about it, otherwise your bottom line is going to suffer. You either won't be able to keep people, or you won't be able to hire people in the first place. Traci, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, it was definitely not a fight at all. Ellen Shook, our chief HR officer globally, she, you know, it was just a non-negotiable for her, right? And bringing her in and trying to make sure that we can think about a culture of health and well-being for our people. So at Accenture, it was really it was an easy decision in order to kind of set, you know, especially through the pandemic too, it was a great add-on because, you know, they're relevant about kind of the diseases that were happening across the globe, how we should return people to the office safely, as well as the immunization, right, debate and talking through that element of how we should continue to kind of evolve our overall offering around the future of work. So it was critical in that space to have a chief wellbeing officer. And I really don't think it was a difficult decision for us at all.
Rajeev, I suppose from a technical perspective, it's you know, you've got a very different view on this. But how's the idea of having a chief wellness officer embraced by the IT department? Was it sort of a, okay, that's nice, or was it, okay, here's something else that we can work with in order to help our digital transformation effort?
Yeah, no, I would say we welcome the sort of the input, and as I said before, the technologists think in a certain way, right? And having let's just call it the human aspect of some of what we are trying to do is absolutely critical. And we continue to partner with our people organization and having a well-being officer who actually thinks about these things. And frankly, what is going to have an impact on how we think about solution designs and implementations and such. And that input is critical for us to be able to support our colleagues and clients along the way, right? I mean, so I would say we welcome that and input, and we continue to sort of partner to ensure that we are thinking beyond just the technology components of, hey, we're going to deploy a new tool, but hey, what does that really mean? How does it change how people work, etc.? So having that input is critical.
Another question in from the audience, and something quite similar to what we were talking about before the session began. Do you think now that the status quo working model is extinct, that company expenditure will move from real estate, for example, offices, to an investment in employees' immediate home environment? So not just offering equipment, but developing and improving on people's home offices, for example. Rajeev, if you would like to take that first.
Yeah. Look, I mean, this is an active discussion. So as I said, we have a smart working model, and we actually have a group of folks that are generally thinking about what does that look like for us? What is the office of the future look like, and what are the things that we need to provide to the colleague, not just purely from an equipment perspective, but other things that come along with that. Hey, it's the right tooling, it's the right microphone, it's the right camera, all of those types of things. And equally important is, as we see more and more, we saw the survey, right? It's not 100% remote, it's not 100% hybrid, it's not 100% of anything, right? So we are going to be in a mixed mode, and a large population is going to be hybrid. Sometimes you're in the office, sometimes you're not, but the expectation is that we are trying to provide a consistent experience irrespective of where you are. And so for that reason, the investment has to shift to a certain extent. And I'm not going to say, hey, the real estate investment is going to be less because the technology goes up or vice versa, but it's trying to find the right balance between the two, because we want to provide that consistent experience and an inclusive experience for irrespective of where you are.
Mm-hmm.
Traci, again, that's another really nice overlapping question.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts or feelings on it?
I think, Rajeev said all what I think I would say, but in addition, I think if we go back to that Future of Work study, really what came out of that is people really want the hybrid work model, right? During COVID, it helped them around improving their mental health and stronger working relationship, and really kind of feeling that better off, right? In that moving away from kind of status quo. I think the question organizations really need to be asking themselves is how we unlock that person's potential, enabling them to be healthy and productive, right? Regardless of really where they're working. And really how we inspire those experiences for our people is key as well, because we know that they want flexibility. We know that they want to feel empowered to work with their teams. And we also know that that sense of belonging is really connected to those in-person experiences, because that is important, right? The human connection is something you can't ever remove, right? I think, again, there's a small cadre of individuals that don't need that, but a majority of us need that human connection. So I think the Office of the Future, again, we have, similar to what Rajeev said, we have a group focused on future of work, and how that not one size is really going to fit all based on the work we do and the people that we employ. So having that omni-connected experience is at kind of the base of what we do, and just ensuring it's inclusive and it's connected and it's built on that cultural relevancy and enabling that diversity and equality too is really kind of the heart of what we're trying to achieve. And to that end, right, remote work is included in our delivery model.
One final question from the floor before we wrap up there, and I think, Rajeev, you might be the person to answer this one. But could the quality of IT support improve well-being by increasing confidence in IT tools?
I would sort of say this is a bit of a trick question, right? The obvious answer is yes, right? So look, I mean, the point is that we want to provide the right tools that just work, right? I mean, people who are non-technical, they have other things that they need to worry about. They're focused on a client, they're focused on some other tasks that are needed. If we provide the right tooling with the right support, that generally sort of reduces the stress. One less thing to worry about, right? I guess that's the way to sort of think about it. Is one less to think about because it just works. Mm-hmm. It's like having your lights come on, and if the lights come on every day, this is not something that you really think about very much. And we need to sort of think about. And as I said, our focus on sort of the end user and the experience and the training and the organization change management is really driven by the fact that we want to give that confidence so that people can focus on what they need to worry about versus worrying about technology. Mm-hmm. Technology is what they use to get their work done rather than worry about technology and as to how they get work done.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Rajeev and Traci, for being with us. If you would like to follow up with our panelists, you can email our producer, Sean. His email is seandunn@mediateam.ie. That's it for TechFire, with many thanks to our sponsor today, Aon. If you wish to rewatch this event, you will be able to do so on TechFire.ie. I also invite you to keep an eye on for Rolling News, the daily technology newsletter, and the weekly Tech Radio podcast on TechCentral.ie. Thanks everyone for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.